The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I listen back to a lot of my own podcasts, particularly the beginnings of shows, and my first thought is always, God, you really sound like you're waking up at the start of the podcast. You got to fix that. But it feels so forced to open a show with a, what's happening, everybody? It's just not, it's not in my wheelhouse. So sorry, the beginnings of shows are going to sound like I'm being roused. I'm not really. I'm wide awake. A lot of these shows end up getting recorded in the evenings, in fact. I'm awake all day. Not this particular moment, but you get the idea. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everybody. I'm Dan Besbris. This is a Hoop Ball presentation, the continued ride here towards the start of the NBA season. We're really coming downhill at this point. 12 days left until we start the season. It is October the 4th. We are under the 2-week mark. We got a great show coming up. We're going to talk to Dylan Jackson of At the Hive about the Hornets and how their rotations are shaking out in the post-Dwight Howard era. We've got Ethan Norof on the program, formerly of Roto World. He'll be breaking down his team in the Hoop Ball mock draft. I want to give the little disclaimer here at the beginning of the podcast that Ethan thought the mock draft was head-to-head. It was actually Roto, so he built his team a little bit differently than some of the other teams in it. But it's kind of an interesting look at what you can do if you're building a head-to-head team versus Roto. If it was a Roto team, I think he would have made some different choices, and you'll hear him illustrate that as we get to that point of the podcast. But a lot of fun. 2 guests on today's show, which means 2 coupon codes for the Hoop Ball Draft Guide. Those are coming up later in the program. I am at Dan Besbris on Twitter, for those of you that have not yet followed me. I know this is a time of year where a lot of new people get involved in the podcast. We got new listeners, folks coming out of the woodwork these days, and it's awesome. We are thrilled to have you. It is a distinct privilege in what is effectively a fairly niche market. You know, fantasy sports as a whole has gotten very big if you roll it all together. Football, baseball, hockey, basketball, DFS of every type. There's a ton of fantasy players out there, but fantasy basketball, that's when you really start to whittle it down, and the fact that such a large number of you have chosen this podcast, well, I'm thrilled. I'm grateful. I'm not going to say I'm humbled because I think that's a ridiculous term and I think people misuse it. I am not humbled. I am excited. It's a very different feeling than being humbled. You know, if I found out that Vin Scully was listening to the broadcast, then I'd be humbled. But when all of you guys are listening to it, I'm excited. This is fun. This is a time of year where everybody's checking out fantasy basketball stuff, getting ready for their drafts, getting ready for opening day. And we're, like I said, we're snowballed, man. We're rolling downhill and we're picking up snow as we go. Not a drug reference. So stop it, you dirty, filthy monster. If you have a moment, and I haven't done this in a couple of days, if you have a moment, please do rate and review the podcast. We appreciate that. If you have constructive feedback, if you hate the show, feel free to just tell me on Twitter. I really do take all of the feedback to heart. I read them. I mean, those of you that have listened to the podcast for a couple of years now, you know that when someone said, hey, you take too long with the intros. I've tried to shorten those a little bit. Maybe not today. Do a better job on this one. Hey, Dan, you whatever it is, like when I got called pedantic, I thought, what, screw it, I'm leaning into this one. That's just the way the show is. But if you have constructive feedback that I feel I can actually take to heart and make some adjustments, I'll do that. And if you really like the show, well, then we really appreciate those 5-star reviews. And first and foremost, many of you I know have already done this, but if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. That is enormous. Shows that get new subscriptions are the ones that get featured, and that's how more people can find us the easiest way. I mean, you, the new users, you probably found us by searching for Fantasy NBA podcasts. Not everybody has the wherewithal to go through that whole process. If we can get ourselves onto the hot list, then we can grow faster. We can continue to offer more stuff here on the show and at Hoop Ball, and we'll love you forever. So, all of that out of the way, let's dive right into the show. We have Charlotte Hornets beat. We have fantasy stuff. It is a big one. You guys know I'm very into the Charlotte Hornets this year with Dwight Howard gone, and it's time to see if I'm right or wrong about that. I'm really excited about this one, guys. We've been lusting for a connection to Hornets Town, and we've got one now. So now we have somebody to bother. This gentleman, I don't know if he knows what he's gotten himself into. Now he's going to be super annoyed with us over the next couple of months. But when a team has big changes, that means that we got to know about them. So before I bother you, before I bug you to a state of tears, welcome to the podcast, Dylan Jackson at JacksonNBA, Jaxon on Twitter. He writes for at The Hive. That's the Charlotte Hornets SB Nation blog at _the_Hive on Twitter. Welcome to the pod, my man.
I am very happy to be here, excited for this opportunity, and let's talk about some basketball.
So, the Hornets. Okay, I am very pro Hornets. Everybody that's listened to me on this show over the offseason has heard me talking. Okay, so background, I guess. I'm a very pragmatic Laker fan, and I watched what happened with Dwight Howard, and it developed a bit of a sore taste, and emotionally I did hold it against him a little bit for a little while. But then we've seen this kind of a hopping from team to team, where everywhere he goes, he actually looks okay, but it seems like the team tends to get a tiny bit worse. And I promised I would leave some of my biases out of this thing, but that's a big departure this offseason. No D12 in Hornets land. That opens up all sorts of stuff for everybody else. And I kind of just wanted to get your overall feeling, before we get into the individual players, of what does that mean for the team as a whole? How does that change the way the Hornets operate on the offensive and defensive ends?
Well, I really think the offense kind of stalled when Dwight Howard got involved, I guess you would put it. He turned the ball over at least 3 times a game. He didn't really pass out of the post. He just kind of stalled the offense. And when James Borrego came in, he wanted a fast offense. We've been operating with the 12-second shot clock in practice. So they really, really want to speed things up. And Dwight Howard just really isn't a part of that. So I think getting rid of him and bringing in Cody Zeller and Willie Hernangomez, I think that's just the way they want to play. They fit more of the style of James Borrego, and really James Borrego is more of a mini D'Antoni. That's how I like to put it. Just 3-pointers, switching on defense, that sort of thing. And Dwight Howard just didn't really fit that. We saw that from the press conference, Borrego's opening press conference. He had all these great things to say about the young players, Kemba Walker, Jeremy Lamb, some rotation guys. And then he got to Dwight Howard, and he just didn't really talk fondly of him.
Well, okay, so that sort of falls in line with what it seemed like we were able to see with the eye test, looking in from the outside. Borrego feels like, and obviously this is a fantasy basketball show, he feels like that's a boon for fantasy folks, someone who's getting everybody going, moving the ball, more shots, more possessions, less stalling of the offense. Is there anything that fantasy owners should not like about the change over from Clifford to Borrego?
Well, if we're talking fantasy terms,
reality or
fantasy, I don't really think there's anything too negative. Just in terms of a change from Steve Clifford to James Borrego, because really James Borrego is going to play a more offensive style of ball, and I know that's what benefits fantasy owners more. And Steve Clifford was more of an interior defense type of guy. So just in terms of fantasy, I think James Borrego is quite the upgrade.
Outstanding. That's good for everybody to hear. So you mentioned some interesting names along the way as you were talking about all the folks that Borrego was lauding praise upon. Kemba Walker, Jeremy Lamb. The other names that often surface and should are Nick Batum, who last year was coming off an injury, just started to kind of find his form a little bit towards the end of the year. Marvin Williams, who had a really solid role for that club for a couple of seasons and then kind of faded into obscurity last year. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, who we've seen the health problems creep up. You talked about Cody Zeller and Willie Hernangomez. Frank Kaminsky is probably the other guy I'd throw in. Let's start at the top and work our way down just in terms of size. How do the center minutes get distributed now? Because in this modern NBA, it's hard to deploy traditional big men. Does that mean more for Frank Kaminsky? Does it mean more for Cody Zeller because he moves so well? we've wanted to see more Willy Hernangomez everywhere he's been. He's, a rebounding monster, but it seems like he had some issues last year just with schemes. Who sees the center minutes? Does anybody take control, you think?
Well, as of right now, it looks like Cody Zeller is going to go into the season as the starter, but I really would not count out Willy Hernangomez as taking that starting spot. In only 17 minutes of play last night, he had, I believe it was 16 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 blocks, which is very, very promising. We saw him improve over the summer league this year, and just throughout the offseason, he's been putting on a ton of weight. So I really wouldn't be surprised if he took over that starting center spot for the Hornets. I think Zeller right now is just a little bit better of a scheme fit, and that's why he's going to play more minutes early on. But, I mean, if you're going for longevity, I think Willy Hernangomez is the way to go.
And it seems go ahead.
I completely forgot to mention Frank Kaminsky. I don't think he's going to be in the center rotation this year just because we've got Hernangomez, we've got Cody Zeller. Last year, Kaminsky played a little bit more of a power forward role for Steve Clifford, and I just don't think that's going to be sustainable with all of the forwards we've got this year. We've got Miles Bridges, MKG moved to the bench. He's going to see a lot of minutes at the 4. Dwayne Bacon can play some at the 4, and obviously Marvin Williams. So Frank Kaminsky might be the odd man out in the big rotation.
Is Marvin Williams the starting 4 this year?
As of right now, yeah. He's on the older side. He's 33 years old, so I wouldn't be too shocked to see, especially with his start to this year, Miles Bridges take over that spot, although he is a little bit undersized. It would just be a fun way to get fans in the stadium if the team does start underperforming.
So you think maybe if things don't go outstandingly the first 2.5 months, something like that, you might see a little bit of a culture switch?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised, if Malik Monk started taking over some minutes, if Dwayne Bacon started getting in the rotation a little bit more. And I just mentioned him, Miles Bridges. He already looks really, really good. He had 14 points last night against the Miami Heat. So I'm really interested to see how this season goes for the Hornets and whether or not they make changes depending on how good they are.
I feel kind of optimistic. It's probably all still stems from that Dwight Howard stuff. Do you feel like they could get off to a quick start this season? Maybe I'm out of line with that.
I think their system is different enough to where teams won't really be knowing what to expect when they go into playing the Hornets. But as to starting quickly, it really just depends on Kemba Walker and how he returns. Obviously, he's our lone all-star, and getting him to full form as quickly as possible would be the top priority if you're trying to win as many games as possible, which for this Hornets team, they're trying to. I wouldn't say they're going to come out of the gate on fire, but I wouldn't rule it out as a possibility.
That was basically the one spot on the floor where I wasn't going to make you talk, because it seems like, obviously, if he's healthy, Kemba Walker's going to be seeing the lion's share of the minutes at the point guard spot. The other wings, the shooting guard, the small forward, Nick Batum, how is his health this year? He feels like he could be sort of ripe for a bounce-back season. And then Jeremy Lamb, in whatever order you prefer here, I guess. Let's go Batum first. Anything extraordinary we should be looking for on the Nick Batum front, or is this just sort of a let's hope he gets back to what he normally does when he's healthy kind of season?
Nick Batum is such an interesting player because he's not your traditional forward. He's a pass-first type of guy. He's probably the Hornets' best passer, actually. I'm interested to see how he bounces back, if he does at all. But last year, he dealt with the UCL injury, which is something to do with your elbow. I believe it was against the Pistons in the preseason. He injured it and was out 8 weeks or so. And so that just really hindered him last season. So if he does, in fact, get back to full health, he should get back to that 14-point sort of range, maybe 5 assists and 5 rebounds. I don't expect him to do too much because the Hornets really, really did not do a good thing when they re-signed him to that $120 million contract in 2016. But Nick Batum, hopefully he can return to his old self. If not, it could be trouble for the Hornets.
Yeah, I think I had forgotten that was a UCL. That's an injury you hear more about in the baseball circles. That's the Tommy John ligament, if I'm not mistaken. Jeremy Lamb in the starting lineup. This is something that folks in the fantasy community, and this is obviously, you can always split things down the middle a little bit. the fantasy folks have wanted Jeremy Lamb to be seeing more opportunity for years. And last year he sort of did with Batum out, but then, got relegated back to a bench gunner role once Nick was healthy. How does he fit into this starting lineup? He's a score first kind of guy. I guess it sounds like from your description, maybe that fits pretty well with Nick Batum next to him.
I love inserting Jeremy Lamb into the starting lineup. Last year, before Nick Batum came back, he was averaging, I think, 17 points per game in those first couple of weeks in the season, which is great because we don't really have many scorers other than, Malik Monk, who isn't developed, Miles Bridges, again, another young guy, to really insert into that starting lineup. And to have Jeremy Lamb, another score first type of guy alongside Kemba Walker, it really does wonders for our offense, just having another guy who can put the ball in the basket.
Is there any competition there in terms of, okay, so let me rephrase that question a little bit. It sounds to me, and you can tell me again if I'm reading this wrong, it sounds to me like the beginning of the season is going to largely feature the veterans. So if you were looking for production, if you were, again, and I hate to force you into the fantasy side of things, but if you're looking for production, you probably want to start veterans and keep a close watch on the Hornets' win-loss record. Does that sound right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the Hornets record starts to go down and quick, I would really start taking a look at those young guys because James Borrego has shown a willingness to actually play them significantly more than Steve Clifford would have. And I think that's just something fantasy owners should really keep an eye on. Malik Monk played 17 minutes per game last year, and that's just not going to be the same under Borrego. He's going to score a lot more points. Miles Bridges, he's already been in the rotation a lot in the preseason. He's going to get a lot of points. He's going to be one of our main rotation guys. So keep an eye on the young guys. They might insert them into the starting lineup if things start to go downhill.
And tell me if I'm reading you right on this one. It sounded like the center spot was one where you thought we might see more Willy Hernangomez regardless of how the team's record looks.
Yeah, I just think he's a lot better of a player than Cody Zeller. He's more physical. He's really good he's shown flashes on defense. I wouldn't say he's really good on defense, but he's shown the ability to stretch the floor in the preseason. Rebounding is obviously a really good skill in him. Just overall offense in him is a lot better than Zeller, who, he really specializes in the pick and roll. He's not going to put up stats. So I'd take a look at Willy Hernangomez, maybe 20 games this season, maybe take that starting spot from Zeller.
Interesting. Okay, last question before I let you go. This one's more of an overarching type of deal. I am an NBA League Pass subscriber, which means that I am subjected to, and sometimes last year, against my will, a lot of Hornets games on the HD channel, because you guys start first. You got the first game out of the chute most nights. Are they going to be more fun this year? Last year, the Hornets were a little bit boring sometimes.
Last year, the Hornets were absolutely boring, and I know that because I watched most of the games. I will definitely say that. But this year, they should be a lot more exciting. We've got hyper-athletic guys in Miles Bridges, Malik Monk. I've talked about them a lot. MKG was relegated to the bench. He's also really athletic. He's shown a lot of improvement at the 4. Frank Kaminsky has been relegated as well. It looks like he's going to not get as many minutes, which is always a plus because he's not a good basketball player. Willy Hernangomez is very, very exciting to watch. Jeremy Lamb alongside Kemba Walker is going to be more exciting with Nick Batum at the 3, Marvin Williams at the 4. So, yeah, I'd say they're more exciting to watch. But if you're going by League Pass teams, I would probably still stay away from them.
Well, that was brutal honesty, if nothing else. He is still.
Yeah, I can't lie to you. They're just not a very good, fun team to watch.
But better, but on the way up. That's all you can really ask for. And when, the HD game is the one that's at 7 p.m. Eastern every night, and it's either you guys or the Wizards. Like, that's the first one on League Pass every night. So,
well, you just mentioned hate of Dwight Howard.
I do. So I'm hoping for you guys now. That's my hope, that it's all Hornets, and I don't have to watch Dwight Howard smile as he ruins another team. But enough about me and my hatred for Dwight. He is Dylan Jackson. He is Jackson NBA, Jaxon NBA on Twitter. He writes for At The Hive, the Charlotte Hornets SB Nation blog. That is At The Hive, again, At The Hive with underscores if you want to follow them on Twitter. Dylan, thank you so much, my man. Can I bug you once we get started this year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can have me on as many times as you want. I'll always be free because I typically don't have anything going on at night. So
you sound like a very exciting man.
Oh, yeah. I've got a ton of commitments, obviously. So,
well, thank you, Dylan. It's much appreciated. I will bug the crap out of you. You've now sealed your fate.
Sounds good.
Also, I should mention to all the listeners out there, we continue to attach a coupon code to every single guest appearance here on Fantasy NBA Today. You can get $3 off any product over at hoop-ball.com. Well, let's see. We got a Hornets guest on, so why don't we make the coupon code, I don't know. What do you think, Dylan? I'll put it on you. What should we make the coupon code?
As a Hornets fan last year, I made a ton, and I mean a ton. I made like dozens of Michael Carter Williams jokes. So maybe something like MCW missed layup or something like that.
MCW missed layup is probably too many letters, but we will make it an acronym. We'll fully acronymize it. So it'll be MCW ML for missed layup. MCW ML. That's a tougher one to remember, but I think you guys can do it because it probably made you laugh. $3 off anything over at hoop-ball.com. Once again, Dylan, thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
That was Dylan Jackson, guest number 1 here on our 2-guest episode of Fantasy NBA Today for Thursday. Forgot to mention, by the way, I'm at Dan Besbris. You guys heard that. You can follow the Hoop Ball blurb feed at Hoop Ball Fantasy. That feed is blowing up these days. I think there's been about a 15% follower increase over the last 3 weeks, and it's just going to keep going up. Again, this is when everybody's finding their fantasy info, and that's a perfect spot to get the fastest news tweeted out whenever things are happening. They've got preseason info. You got box score stuff. It's beautiful. We also want to mention here in the middle of the show, the Box Score Breakdown. The Box Score Breakdown podcast is back here at Hoop Ball. We have resurrected it thanks to the hard work of Adrian Benjamins and Neil Rochlani 3 times a week until the start of the season, and then Monday through Friday at the end of games every night. You're going to have a podcast ready to go. You can listen to it as you're getting ready for bed. It'll tell everything that happened during that evening's slate of games in a 30 to 60-minute window. You can make all your decisions. You don't have to check all the box scores yourself. Let Adrian and Neil help you out. It is so important to be able to check the box scores the second the games come to their conclusion, and now we've got a show to do that for you. It is awesome. You can find it at Hoop Ball. The box score breakdown, any episodes will be right there on the front page. You can also click on the podcast tab, or you can just search box score breakdown in Google, and I was able to find the iTunes page pretty quickly as well. So again, that's the box score breakdown. Adrian and Neil holding it down. You've heard them here on Fantasy NBA Today. They've got their own show now, and it is awesome. They're breaking down preseason games this week. I know, guys, we do a lot of stuff here at Hoop Ball. Guest number 2 on the podcast. Settle in for this one, folks. We're going on for a little bit. We break down Ethan Norof's team from the 9-category industry mock draft. Again, Ethan drafting for head-to-head instead of roto. Just wanted to once again put that little disclaimer on there, so when you hear the team, it'll be a little bit different than some of the other clubs we've broken down, and a nice new look at what you can do in a 9-category format if you're drafting for head-to-head as opposed to roto. Also, by the way, some fun stories with Ethan. He and I go farther back than I think people realize. Schedules be damned, ladies and gentlemen. We were going to make this thing work come hell or high water. It has been way too long since this next guest and I have been able to catch up either off or on air. He is Ethan Norof. My man. Do you know that, by the way, first of all, hello, Ethan. How are you?
Real well, Dan. How we doing, baby?
Okay, so I don't know if you probably know this. Maybe you don't. But I'll tell the story again, because the last time we spoke on a pod was ages ago.
Absolutely.
I was just starting to even consider getting into fantasy sports stuff. I knew that the Bakersfield Blaze, where I worked in minor league baseball for many years, I knew that there was a decent chance at that point that team was going to go belly up and move across the country. So I started to think, all right, well, what can I do? What can I do from home that would make me happy? I'm passionate about. We're gonna have a kid soon over here. I gotta plot my course a little bit. And I thought, I love fantasy basketball. I win every damn year. I add a new team to my roster, and I win that too. Maybe I should actually learn how to write or talk about it. And so I started reaching out to people in the business. Sent some emails. You were the one guy who got back to me. Do you remember this?
I do. I'm glad. I'm certainly glad that I did. Right. I believe in access and opportunity. So we all needed somebody at some point to just give us a chance, have a conversation. So, anytime somebody drops me an email and they're interested in what I have to say, what I have to do, I think I owe it to them to at least provide a response.
Ethan Norof is arguably, and I'm hoping that someday I can take this title from you, but the nicest man in fantasy sports. And it was outstanding. Ethan and I met at a little deli in Sherman Oaks, California, and you talked me through sort of how your year goes with the fantasy sports stuff, what you need to do. I think I may have even sent you a sample of some writing stuff. And then it was I think it was like a year later that Brew started Hoop Ball, and I thought, all right, you know what? Screw it. I talked to Ethan. This is something I think I can do. And so most people don't know this. This is sort of the Dan Besbris origin story. You are the origin story for me. Ethan Norof, at Ethan_Norof on Twitter, Norof. So I think I'd like to start this podcast by saying thank you. You're the man.
Hey, man, I appreciate that. Hey, I can't ask for a better introduction than that, right? I think I might have just cracked the door open for you a little bit, but you're the one that swung it wide open. So you owe yourself a nice little pat on the back. I'm just happy to be a part of the process.
You were a big part of the process. Ethan Norof, a longtime fantasy writer, an expert, and a member of our 9-category industry mock. What else is going on, man? How's life?
And life is good, man. Getting married in about 6 months, teaching the middle school youth how to be good, positive human beings and a functional member, contributing to our evolving society. And, other than that, it's hard to complain. I think we all got a list of problems, but rather than focusing on the negative, we talk about what we're grateful for and, really focus on that. And you live a much more fulfilling life as a result.
Give Ethan a follow on Twitter. You'll want to by the end of this show. I can guarantee it, because he had one of the strangest fantasy teams in our 9-category mock, and I am very interested to hear how the whole thing broke down. Mr. Norof, you ready to talk about your team?
Sure am. It was quite a weird one. We went back and forth on the first round pick a little bit, and we had to wind up with Kawhi. And this was before we heard the laugh, that ha 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 ha. It was before any of that. So there was no entertainment value in this pick. It was simply that, look, there's a guy who wants to get paid, whether it's by the Raptors or any other team in the NBA, and he's going to have to prove that he can stay on the court if that's going to happen. So I know a lot of people are a little bit maybe gun shy with Kawhi, given everything that transpired last year, but in all honesty, I think this is a new year. And in fantasy, one thing that we really have to be mindful of is we don't use our rankings based on what's happened in the past. I think that's a factor in the process, but it can't be a predictor for success, right? We have to look forward. We have to project. We have to look at the future. And because of that, I don't hold Kawhi to a second-round standard or something crazy like that. If he slides in the second round of your draft, you should be all over him and not even think twice about it.
Yeah, and I don't think that I don't think you'd have to argue with anybody towards the tail end of the first round of this draft. For me, at number 8, I strongly considered it. I just felt like I had access to someone right before you in LeBron James, where I didn't feel like I needed to worry about any of the drama stuff. But I know that talking to Josh Lloyd, who was right after you in this draft at pick 10, he was very upset that you took Kawhi. He was the guy he was hoping would fall one more spot. He ended up with Dame instead. In terms of Kawhi Leonard, Ethan, one thing we obviously know about this guy is when he was healthy 2 years ago, he's a top 5 guy on a per-game basis. And doesn't he really – it feels like he has a lot to prove to people this year, no?
Oh, no question. And that's, I was right there with you. If had you not taken LeBron right before me, I would have, even with Kawhi still on the board, if that was going to be the case. I love Damian Lillard as a player, as a person, as a rapper. I don't love owning Damian Lillard in fantasy leagues, and let me tell you why. Damian Lillard is really, really, really hard to build a team around that's successful in terms of the long run, especially if you're talking a head-to-head format. I've just had so much trouble with that in the past. So as much as I love him, he's not a guy that I target in the first round. So if LeBron was on the board, I would have gone LeBron. But if LeBron and Kawhi were gone, I probably would have gone Oladipo, who went one spot after Lillard.
Yeah, the sort of the big difference between Lillard and Oladipo, who basically go back-to-back in almost every mock that I've seen so far, Dame has a hole in his game that Victor doesn't have, and Lillard will hurt you in field goal percent. Yes, obviously he helps you more in other categories like free throws and three-pointers and such, but Oladipo doesn't really have that one down category. He's a rare late first-round kind of dude who's contributing in a positive manner in basically every statistical category. I think maybe slightly sub-average in rebounds, but getting 5 out of a guard is still pretty damn good. And Ethan, I don't think anybody's getting on your case for taking Kawhi. I mean, we all sort of remember how good he was 2 years ago. For me, the spot where your draft starts to take sort of different directions is the next couple of rounds. You had John Wall at 16. You're buying the bounce back then.
Oh, definitely. I'm a huge John Wall and fantasy guy. I think, Eastern Conference, some people say it's wide open. Other people say it's Boston, it's Philly, it's Toronto. I think Washington's got something to prove. I think John Wall's got something to prove. I think he wants to show people that he and Brad Beal can coexist in the same backcourt. I think he wants to show people that he can elevate those players around him. The concern with John Wall, of course, is durability, right? He plays 1,000,000 miles an hour. But when you're looking at the two names that went before and after him, Jimmy Butler, this was before all the trade stuff came out. There were some durability concerns with Mr. Butler, and Kyrie Irving, who missed a substantial part of last season as well. You got Chris Paul in the second round. You got Drew Holiday in the second round. You got Eric Bledsoe in the second round. So you have all these players. A lot of point guards actually had a nice little run there where, yeah, they're all really, really good players, and nobody's going to say, no, I don't want that guy on my fantasy team, but they all have a wart or a concern of some type. So from that perspective, I feel like John Wall's the safest pick, and I also think he offers the most amount of difference-making potential. So what I mean by that is when I look at a head-to-head format and I really consider, okay, how can I win this league? John Wall's a guy who could average over 10 dimes a game, and he can really push 2 steals plus a game if he's healthy. And if you look at his recent history with three-point shot, he really didn't have one before a few years ago. All of a sudden, 2015, he started taking more threes, started taking 4 threes a game. And that pattern has continued to the point where last year he was taking 4 threes a game and he was shooting 37.1%. Now, career, he's only 32.7 because he was so bad earlier when he was younger and before he was really firing away from the three-point line. But that's an area where he's grown his game a little bit, so it's been a lot better. It has had a slight adverse impact on his overall field goal percentage. Came in at only 42% last year. Had to think at least part of that was due to the knee concern. He was playing banged up even before he went out. The turnovers are always going to be high with John Wall because he's got the ball in his hand so much. But the difference-making potential he offers both in assists and steals, it's really, really hard for me to pass up at that point. If I had drafted Oladipo in the first round, I have to think that pick in the second might have been different.
Is this range, and I know I'm veering away from actually the next pick on your team. We'll get back to that in a second. Is this range, the 9-10 slots, is that one of the worst spots to be in a draft, or do you kind of like being in that area? I don't want to lead you down any path. I just know for me personally, that's a tough one because you don't have the option of going back-to-back with your picks. There's a handful of picks that'll come off in between, but you still don't get that cream of the first round crop. I feel like if I could choose, I probably wouldn't want to go 9 or 10, and that's where you got stuck.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree. First of all, I don't like to be at the polar extreme either way because of how many picks elapse between your 2 picks in any given 2 rounds. So first pick, second pick, 9th pick, 10th pick, 11th pick, 12th pick, depending on the size of your league. I don't like to be on those polar extremes. I like to stay a little bit more engaged because when you are on those polar extremes, you tend to reach a little bit more, which can be good or bad depending on how the dice roll for you. But really, I think my sweetest spot in the draft, 12-man drafts, it's got to be right in that 5 or 6 spot. If you're anywhere from 5 through 7 in a 12-player league, you got a shot at Durant. You got a shot at Giannis. You have a shot at LeBron. You have a shot even at Towns in some formats. That's a really, really good place to be. You're going to get a player you can legitimately build around, and it becomes much harder when your first-round pick is Damian Lillard versus somebody whose first-round pick is Kevin Durant.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I've had some other folks on here. Seth Klein, for one, actually said he really likes being down at the turn. I don't feel likewise. It's an interesting spot to be. If you like being down there, you can kind of use it to your advantage because not that many people do. I just, like you, Ethan, I find it very difficult when you have to go back-to-back or very close to back-to-back because, like you said, you end up you got to go get your guys because they're just not going to get back to you, and you end up in a really tough spot. It's almost impossible to gauge who's going to be on the board for your next pick. Like you, I prefer to be right in that nice, meaty core. Keeps you engaged. You don't have to do a ton of guessing. There's usually a couple of guys that'll be coming back your way that you were kind of eyeing the last time around. The edges to me are tough. But we can talk about round 3. Draymond Green at number 33. This is a pretty safe one. This is not one of your picks that makes me scratch my head and ask questions. This is one where I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Draymond Green in the third round, I think last year or even in prior times, he might have been pushing that second round, but we've had some new entrants into the field, guys like Donovan Mitchell, Ben Simmons, who had those meteoric rises after their exciting rookie seasons last year. And so we wind up with Draymond Green in the third round. I was really, I knew I needed to get a big man because we have a 2-center format, and I think it's important to get a big man who you can really trust. I thought it was interesting. Andre Drummond went in this round early. In fact, Drummond went before Miles Turner. I can't say I would have made the same move. I was hoping for Miles Turner in this spot. I drafted him last year quite aggressively and was a little bit disappointed by what he did. But I've been following him all summer. I'm really excited about the work that he's put in. And I think that Pacers team is going to really need somebody to step up alongside Oladipo if they're going to be as competitive as they hope. So I love Turner this year. Draymond Green or LaMarcus Aldridge to me is just not even a question in terms of fantasy hoops. I don't like having boring players on my team. I don't like having players who only contribute in 2 or 3 categories. Even if LaMarcus scores 20 points a game, points are one of the easiest things to find on the waiver wire. There's always going to be somebody who's scoring more than you expect. And when you look at some of the other big men who went right around here, Marc Gasol went off the board. I'm not loving Gasol this year. Al Horford, I'm worried about Al Horford's overall productivity with Kyrie on the floor, with Hayward on the floor, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. There's so many contributors. And then when we move into round 4, I actually took DeAndre Jordan, one pick right after DeAndre Ayton had just went. And so I would have taken DeAndre Jordan before DeAndre Ayton just from track record perspective. And again, this is a head-to-head league. And so for me, when you have DeAndre Jordan, even though he is an abysmal free throw shooter, right? So the Kawhi pick in round 1, he's a great free throw shooter. Round 4, we come to DeAndre Jordan, and we kind of cancel that out real quick. And that influenced the rest of my draft for sure. But when you're looking at DeAndre Jordan and you look at the center depth in Dallas, DeAndre Jordan could average 15 rebounds a game easily, maybe even in his sleep, 2 blocks a game. This is going to be a guy they really rely on. He took the deal in Dallas. He wants to prove himself. I think he's going to be set up for a nice little year down there.
So this ended up being sort of, as round 4 came around for you, this sort of turned into more of a punt strategy then?
I would say so. I mean, I just looked at the names available on the board, and again, really thinking about that difference-making potential. When you're talking about a round where Jarrett Allen goes, you're talking about a round where Nick Vucevic goes, you're talking about a round where Otto Porter goes, you're talking about a round where John Collins, who I like a lot, goes in the 4th round. And you say, wow, John Collins in the 4th round, really? And while it seems kind of high, you start looking at, well, if I don't get a quality big man, at least one to build around, I'm going to wind up with 2 centers who are maybe number 2, number 3, number 4 even. And it's really, really hard to bounce back in those categories when that's your foundation to start with.
Yeah, this was part of, you make a really good point there. This was part of a pretty significant center run. All of the names, by the way, that Ethan just rattled off, starting with Andre Drummond at pick 27 and ending with Jarrett Allen at pick 44. All of those centers occurring in that little 18-person pocket, including, you could even go 2 spots earlier and talk about Rudy Gobert. It was Gobert at 25, Drummond at 27, Capella at 28, Miles Turner at 29, Draymond at 33, Aldridge at 34, Gasol at 36. I could go on. Horford, Ayton, Jordan, Vucevic. That's 38 through 41, all right in a row. Then Collins and Allen at 43 and 44. That is a ton of big men coming off the board over a round and a half. I mean, there's more centers coming off than the other 2 positions combined in there. That seems wild.
And I think it's fascinating that all those names were picked ahead of Hassan Whiteside in round 5.
Poor Hassan Whiteside. How the mighty have fallen. What do you think about Hassan, by the way? I know he wasn't your pick in round 5, but was he a guy you were looking at, or is he a guy you're afraid of this year?
He was definitely a guy I was looking at. In fact, to be perfectly honest, I made that DeAndre Jordan pick having been awake for about 5 minutes that day. So had I actually awake, my strategy may have tweaked. Again, it's a mock, so, we like to see how things play out. I think Hassan Whiteside is a cautious buy, if that makes sense. It's kind of like when you go to Marshalls or TJ Maxx and you see that nice-looking polo on the rack and it's priced for $25, $30 instead of $60 or $80. You're kind of like, wow, that looks nice. What's wrong with that? And the buttons might be off, or there might be a thread hanging or something like that. It's kind of how I would look at Hassan Whiteside this year. I get the concern. I understand he did not produce last year. But when you look up and down this Miami roster, if he doesn't produce, who will? I know they really like Bam. I understand all of that. I think they're paying Hassan Whiteside a lot of money. And, at the end of the day, this is business, right? So I think Hassan Whiteside will find his place on the floor. They're tweaking some things defensively for him, allow him to stay around the rim a little bit more. And if Miami does wind up getting Jimmy Butler and Hassan Whiteside stays on that roster with him, I think that will help tremendously.
Yeah, I've been pretty surprised at the hate for Hassan Whiteside. I know he missed 28 games last year, and it sort of felt like a bad season. And yeah, if you drafted him at like 17, it would be a pretty awful result for you. But he was number 39 in 9-cat overall. He shot 70% at the free throw line, which was really high, and I think better than most people expected. And even while only playing 25 minutes a game, he averaged 14 and 11, with 0.7 steals and 1.7 blocks. I feel like it wasn't as terrible as everybody made it out to be. The injury stuff, yeah, that sucked, but overall, when he was on the floor, he was still a decent impact fantasy player, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think there was definitely a couple things going on. There was the return on investment. So like you said, people who's burned a top 20 or top 25 pick on him, he wasn't doing quite enough, a la Miles Turner, same sort of thing. But there's also a recency bias in fantasy sports, and we see it almost every year where, that guy who was seen as a disappointment or as a letdown or didn't quite fulfill his potential, he winds up sliding in drafts the year after. And then when he bounces back, everyone goes, well, where was everybody on this player? And, it's a little bit of groupthink going on, right? When you're hearing from consistently from analysts, you're hearing Hassan Whiteside is this, Hassan Whiteside is that, Hassan Whiteside is this, Hassan Whiteside is that. It starts to cloud your mind. And so that's why it's so important for people who really like to do their own research. They can pull in any resource that they want, and if we're talking about resources, they should really be looking at Hoop Ball, right? Let's be honest. Let's plug it a little bit. I'm a company man, no problem with that. So if you're resources, you really should be looking at Hoop Ball more than any other. But at the same time, it's kind of like watching the news. Do you just parrot back what they tell you, or do you interpret the information, form an opinion on your own, and then you're able to articulate what you think based off of that? So I like to think of rankings as a guide, as a blueprint, as a place to start, but I'm not locked in. If someone has DeMar DeRozan and Gordon Hayward in a certain order and they're three spaces away from each other, I might flip that. And it has to be the team that you want to build. Remember, so many people get lost in this fantasy sports triangle, for lack of a better way to say it, especially with hoop, where they feel like they have to follow the pattern or they have to follow the rankings. At the end of the day, this is your team. You are the GM. You want to root for these players. So I always tell people, look, if you can't decide between two players, if it's truly a coin flip for you in any given round, whether it's round 3 or round 13, pick the player that you'd rather root for. Have some fun with it. Make an informed decision, but also allow yourself to have an entertainment to it. This is an entertainment business, and the reality is GMs have preferences in the NBA. Fantasy GMs have preferences on the digital hardwood, right? Build the team you want to watch play.
I was surprised, just following up on the Whiteside thing, I was surprised that he went this early. I've seen him falling even farther in this than in other mocks. What's been your experience with Whiteside in other mock drafts?
Yeah, I've seen him go as early as in the 40s and as late as in the 70s. Wow. So that's a pretty significantly large range. And when we were talking about players in the 40s in this draft, you're talking about DeAndre Jordan was the 40th overall pick. We had C.J. McCollum in that round. Otto Porter was 45. And then when you start blowing by 60 and you get into 65, we're talking about Taurean Prince. We're talking about, Lauri Markkanen. Of course, this was before we learned he's going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks with an elbow injury. We're talking about Joe Ingles, 70th overall. So that's quite a dramatic slide in terms of talent and level of availability in terms of position of need. So I think Hassan Whiteside is definitely a wild card this year. I would not hesitate to draft him as high as round 4 if he fits the structure of my team at that point. But I would feel a lot better if I could get him around that 50th pick in that 50 to 60 range. I feel like it's just high enough where I'm still investing at a discounted premium, if that makes sense. And if things don't line up as they did last year, then I feel a little bit better. Okay, I'm not counting on this guy to be a foundational piece of my team. Instead, he's more of a complementary contributor.
Chris Welsh, by the way, was the gentleman who picked up Hassan Whiteside at 55. Lord Welsh taking Ethan's pick just a couple slots ahead. That left you with Blake Griffin at 57. He is a polarizing fantasy name. Tell me your thinking on this one.
Yeah, he really is. And I mean, I looked at Blake Griffin and I really looked at him actually in the round prior too. And I really just thought about it and I said, why is this guy still on the board? And so I looked up his Detroit numbers. You know, he got 25 games with the Pistons last year. We averaged 20 points, 6.5 rebounds, 6 assists, and he averaged a couple threes. Now, the thing that people don't like about him is that he brings nothing defensively to the table. In those 25 games, 0.4 of a steal, 0.4 of a block, shot 43.3% overall. So he doesn't necessarily fit that traditional big man mold because he's not getting the blocks, so he's not getting the steals, doesn't have a high field goal percentage, but that's because he's stepping out way more. When he got to the Pistons, he was shooting over 5 threes a game. That's going to have an impact. But then you look at his free throw percentage, and with the Pistons, he was at 78.5%. That's very respectable for a big man. So if I, in my head, I said, well, look, I just drafted DeAndre Jordan, so I don't have to worry about blocks right now. In the round before that, in round 3, I just drafted Draymond Green. That should give me some defensive stats. So why can't I have a big man who doesn't necessarily need to bring the defensive stats but can do literally everything else? DeAndre Jordan's going to shoot above 65% from the floor. Green is going to be up there. Draymond Green is going to be up there as well. Not quite that high, but you have to think that he's going to have a positive field goal percentage as well. So I like Blake Griffin in this spot because for me, he offers a lot of upside. They have to have him be the focal point of that team if they're going to have any level of success. It can't be Andre Drummond. We already know it can't be Reggie Jackson. His ankles are already a problem again. And after Blake Griffin, at the names that went, you're looking at Luka Doncic, you're looking at Steven Adams, you're looking at Ricky Rubio, Jonas Valanciunas. There isn't a guy on there for me where I'm like, wow, superstar upside this year for fantasy. Blake Griffin could very easily have superstar upside. He could easily go out for the Pistons and average 25, 8, and 6 in the first 2 weeks, and people everywhere are going to be, wow, where were we on Blake Griffin?
Are you at all concerned about his injury history?
I mean, I think you have to be, right, just because it's been so long and so extensive. But I really think that people forgot about Blake Griffin last year because he was removed from the spotlight. It's kind of amazing the difference between him playing for the LA Clippers versus him playing for the Detroit Pistons. After that trade, and I remember it well because it happened on my birthday, and I had a student who actually rushed back into the room, and it was his birthday too. We share a birthday, and he just rushed back into the room at about 3:35, and he goes, Blake Griffin got traded to the Pistons. And we sat there and talked about it for like a half an hour after school, so I very vividly remember when it went down. But after that, we heard very, very little about it. And I don't know if because nationally the Pistons just weren't covered and nobody was expecting that or what necessarily the case was. But I'm not overlooking Blake Griffin this year. If you give me a big man who I can plug in at forward, I can plug in at center, and who's going to be a massive contributor when he's on the court in the 5th round, and he scores me 20 to 25 points, he grabs me 7 or 8 rebounds, he dishes out 5 to 7 assists every single night. There's a lot to like about that. That sounds like Nikola Jokic in a lot of ways 4 rounds later at a slight discount. Obviously not quite as good as Jokic, but very similar skill set.
I'll tell you, if he could get that field goal percent back up to 46, 47 or something in that neck of the woods, that would do quite a lot to change his outlook. That field goal percent drag is such a pisser for a guy who, 2 years ago was shooting like 49, 50%. I'm okay, Blake. You can get back a little bit closer to the rim if you like. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it.
No question. and I think the Pistons might, maybe instead of 5 threes a game, maybe he takes 4. So maybe he makes 1.5 instead of closer to 2. But I'm not taking Blake Griffin for his threes anyway. So if he could definitely trail back up to 46 or 47, I think people are really going to be looking at him like, wow, why wasn't he off the board in round 3 instead of round 5 or round 6?
Yeah, that would be such a huge difference maker. Brandon Ingram at 64. As a Laker fan, I'm happy with your positive outlook. As someone who's a little bit afraid of Ingram having, the free throw hole and the addition of LeBron, I'm a little bit scared. Talk me off the ledge on this one.
Yeah, gladly. I mean, I'm very high on Brandon Ingram. In fact, I was super pleased when the Lakers chose not to trade him away for Kawhi Leonard. I'm probably Zach Lowe over at ESPN talks about how high he is on Brandon Ingram, and he says he's higher than anyone he ever talks to. I'm probably right at Zach Lowe's level, if not busting through the roof well ahead of him. This is a guy who, in his rookie year, looked like he could not do the one thing that we were told he could do, which was shoot, right? He shot 40% from the field. He shot 29% from the three. He couldn't finish through contact. He wasn't bringing anything to the table. Now we go over to his sophomore year, and granted, he was only on the court for 59 games. Okay, he did battle a little bit of injury issues, but meteoric rise in terms of his efficiency. Now we went from 29% from behind the line to 39% behind the three-point line. That's a major difference. And, the volume wasn't necessarily there. He's only taking a couple threes a game, but the efficiency was. He increased his field goal attempts by over 4 a game, and his overall percentage went up by nearly 7 percentage points, from 40.2 to 47, right on the head. Averaged 12.9 field goal attempts per game, averaged 16.1 points. I always like when there are more points than field goal attempts. That usually translates well. 16 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. He was almost at a steal and a block, 0.8 steals, 0.7 blocks. I think he takes another step forward this year. In fact, I don't think LeBron really inhibits him. I think he actually complements him and allows Ingram to have opportunities that he wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. And I really, really like Brandon Ingram this year. I think he can fix the free throw thing. He was at 68% last year. It's not great, but if he can get above 70, he only takes 5 free throws a game. He's not a guy who gets to the line constantly, and I think LeBron spending a lot of time at the line this year will influence that. So I'm not super worried. I really, really like Ingram. I think, 18 points, 6 rebounds, 4 or 5 assists, a steal, a block, a 3. That's a player in round 6 where I'm all aboard, especially if he shoots 47% overall again. That's really, really hard to find. And I think with Ingram, people forget he just turned 21. I mean, 3 weeks ago, he just turned 21, and he's about to be in his 3rd year in the NBA. He and Lonzo Ball are the same age. You got to give this guy time. The people who wanted to say Brandon Ingram was a bust after his rookie year, we didn't hear from them last year, and I wonder why. Ingram wants to be great. He wants to put in the work, and he's not going to be one of those guys like a Kuzma or a Ball who really bulks up when he puts on strength because he's built like Kevin Durant. He's built like that long and lanky body type. So when you have that type of player, he's always going to be more toned than built. That doesn't mean he's not strong. That doesn't mean he's not capable. That doesn't mean he's not efficient. It just means he's built differently. I really like Ingram this year. And when you look at some of the other names in round 6, talking about Taurean Prince, Will Barton, Lowry Markkanen, Kyle Anderson, Wendell Carter Jr., who I like quite a bit, Joe Ingles, Julius Randle, DeJounte Murray. There's no guy on the board there in my pick where I go, man, I really wish I would have taken this guy. And then in round 7, we're getting into Lonzo Ball, Chris Dunn, Nick Mirotic. Like, what am I passing up in order to take a chance on Brandon Ingram? I think he's got easy top 40 upside, and I drafted him 64th overall. I like that price.
D'Angelo Russell in round 7. This is another guy where you got like the all-polarizing team in this league. How did you pull that off?
Yeah, man. I sensed the theme right around round 5 with the Blake Griffin pick, and I said, yeah, let's just keep it going.
I'm just going to pick all the guys that going to get everybody yelling at you. You're going to have so many comments on Twitter once we release this entire list out into the public. I hope you're ready for that.
Oh, I'm so ready. I love interaction. Everyone's so nice all the time, and they never address you with any sort of formality except your actual first name. So it's love. with D'Angelo in round 7, I needed a guard. Let's start there. I mean, I was in need of a guard, so I was definitely targeting a guard. I don't love D'Angelo Russell's actual style of play, but I love his style of play for fantasy if he can stay on the floor. So let me explain what that means. D'Angelo Russell has basically been the same player now since he's been in the NBA. Year 1, we saw it with the Lakers, and we said, oh, okay, there's some things that I like, there's some things that I don't like, but it's year 1. And in year 2, he was basically the exact same player. In fact, he was slightly less efficient overall. And in year 3, guess what? He was basically the exact same player again. So I don't love him from a developmental standpoint. This is not a guy I would build my franchise around. But when you're a point guard and you can score 15 to 17 points a game and you can hit a couple of threes and you can give me 5 to 6 assists and you can give me 4 rebounds, if you can just get a little bit more active on the defensive end, we can really talk about what you could be. The field goal percentage, obviously, I started trending in a certain direction here, just kind of continued with that. So he's a career 41% shooter, not something that I love. But again, when I look at some of the other names drafted around the spot, you could talk about maybe going Goran Dragic in this spot instead. You could talk about maybe going Zach LaVine, but why? I don't really love Dragic. I think he's got durability concerns. I think Zach LaVine, I think the best thing the Wolves did was trade Zach LaVine so they didn't have to pay him, honestly. That's why I'm not too torn up about where they stand with the whole Jimmy Butler situation right now. But D'Angelo Russell's one of those guys. We're in round 7. Yeah, I mean, he's 81st overall pick, so you're not expecting a lot. So even if he takes marginal steps forward, and remember, this is a guy who's trying to get paid this year. I love contract year players. So at the 81st overall pick, when the next 3 picks are Nicholas Batum, Serge Ibaka, and Dario Saric, I'm willing to roll those dice.
Yeah, and it seems like also just from a team build standpoint, the fact that he's not a great foul shooter for a guard doesn't really have much of an impact on your team because you already have DeAndre Jordan, and in the very next round, and we'll use this as a segue, you grab Dwight Howard. You know, that's one of those situations where if you didn't have DeAndre Jordan at this point and you took Dwight in the 8th round, I'd say, oh my God, you're blowing up your team, but your free throw percentage was already going to suffer, so, you know, if you're gonna punt something, you might as well shoot the moon.
And that's exactly it. And again, when you have DeAndre Jordan and Dwight Howard on the same team, assuming they're both healthy and contributing, with Dwight Howard, you know, sidelined by that back issue now, that's definitely something to monitor. But if you got those two guys and they're going out there, rebounds and blocks should never be something that you lose. And so if I can win 2 categories on any given week with 2 players, one in round 4 and one in round 8, I like that as a place to start. That's for sure.
Round 9, Markelle Fultz. We just got this, by the way, prescient, I should say. You got a little bit of a clairvoyancy thing going on over there, don't you, Ethan? We had news on Friday, I guess it was, the 28th of September, that Fultz was moving into the starting lineup for Philly during the preseason. This draft obviously taking place well before that. But, I mean, this is like one of those prototypical massive upside kind of plays. And to your credit, Ethan, it already looks like it's starting to play itself out.
And that's really all it was for me. I mean, when you're talking about round 9, you could talk about crusty safe vets to avoid, or you could talk about those high upside plays where it's kind of like that $2 scratch ticket where you could hit 20, you could hit 50, you might even hit 100, but you got to play if you want to win, right? So Markelle Fultz was a non-factor last year in round 9. We're talking 105th overall pick, so outside the top 100. Why not at this point? You know, Derek Favors went right before, Dwayne Dedmon right after. Kristaps Porzingis went in this round. Just for the record, I do not think Porzingis plays this year.
Yeah, with you, by the way, 100% with you. I'm so glad someone else finally said it, but continue.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the Knicks, they have nothing to play for this year. The worst thing that they could do is bring Porzingis back too early and for him to get re-injured or to suffer another injury. He's long, he's lanky, he's got a history of lower body injuries. I just think they have nothing to benefit by returning him this year, but that's a whole different conversation. So with Fultz, I mean, if I'm going to draft a point guard here, right, Elfrid Payton went a few picks after that. Isaiah Thomas a few picks after that. Trae Young in the next round in round 10. Easy for me, Markelle Fultz. This guy could be he's a complete unknown, but sometimes you got to be willing to take a chance.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't like Trae Young, and I don't like Elfrid Payton either. So, you know, screw it. I mean, I admit I'm a little bit afraid of a guy like Markelle Fultz after the mental stuff we saw last year, but the upside is absolutely unlimited with this kid, and you know, get the feeling from the Sixers that they want him out there for 24 to 30 minutes a game this year. They have almost no guard depth. They have T.J. McConnell, J.J. Redick, Jared Bayless. I mean, you know, if he's anything, he'll be able to play some kind of minutes this season. So yeah, I'm behind this one, and in terms of shot taking, that makes a lot of sense. You took Carmelo Anthony at 112. You and I actually, I think, are some of the very few people who are in agreement on this one, which is kind of going against the grain. And that's, you know, sort of it's kind of a what's the worst that could happen sort of scenario, right? It's your 10th round pick. He's in a new spot. He's going to get better looks this year than he got at any point with Oklahoma City because they run such a weird offense, the Thunder do. I know that he's old, and I know that there's all sorts of warts with him, but, I mean, you got to give it a try.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really all it was, just exactly that. And for me, when I look at Carmelo, I don't expect him to be a difference maker. I really don't even know what to expect of him, with the exception of, hey, they brought him in for a reason, right? They're going to make sure that he gets opportunities on offense. And Carmelo Anthony, you can say a lot of things about him, and I know he's a polarizing player when you talk about what he means to this game and his legacy, but he is one of the best pure scorers the NBA has ever seen. And I want to say that again. Carmelo Anthony is one of the best pure scorers the NBA has ever seen. It would not surprise me if Melo has nights where some nights he goes for 12 and the next night he goes for 35. It really would not surprise me because he can get that hot that quickly. I will say, if I had to redo this again and I was invested in it for the sake of an actual draft rather than a mock, I'm probably taking Kyle Kuzma in this spot. I might even take Andrew Wiggins in this spot with the Jimmy Butler news. Of course, we didn't know that at this time.
Mm-hmm.
But Kyle Kuzma is one of those guys who I see in round 11, and I go, that is far, far, far too low for him.
Yeah, the Lakers love him. LeBron loves him. Kuzma going at 127. Welsh, got another of your guys. You and the Welsh may need to have a podcast where you just yell about who got what in this mock draft. Yeah, I mean, as a Laker fan, everybody has nothing but outstanding things to say about Kuz as well. He may be a guy that actually benefits from the efficiency bump of playing with guys that can get him better looks than last year, where there's that, and this is kind of like something that people think about, I think, maybe on a smaller scale of, oh, by the way, we're talking to Ethan Norof. I probably should have repeated that at least once to this point, at Ethan_Norof on Twitter. But sometimes there are guys where, Kuzma might do less this year, but he may do less way better. And for fantasy players, that's a really good thing, right?
Yeah, without question. I think, we saw last year that there were times where he was actually being asked to create because the Lakers had a dearth of playmakers. And so we saw him working more off the dribble. We saw him bringing the ball up at certain times, and we saw him with the running hook and really attacking the lane. So he worked on those skills, but now he's going to be a guy who's going to get open looks. He's going to be able to catch it in space. And nobody knew he could hit the three-pointer because that really wasn't a huge part of his game in college. But then once he got to the pros, it was lights out. Or not quite, Kyle Korver, but it was a lot better. And I think with Kyle Kuzma, it's really, really hard to factor in the intangibles for fantasy because with fantasy hoops, we're so stat-driven. We're so focused on the tangible instead of the potential. But Kuzma is one of those guys who just works. He wants to be great. He puts in the extra time. And when you've got LeBron saying good things about your work ethic, it's really something to pay attention to.
I think we got to get you on our Lakers pod over here, too. By the way, you did not get Kyle Kuzma in that round. We just mentioned the Welsh got him. You got Kevin Knox out of New York. Another interesting upside play. Tell me more about Knox at 129.
Yeah, I love Kevin Knox in this rookie class. In fact, I think he could easily become Rookie of the Year if everything breaks correctly. We talked about the fact that, I think Kristaps Porzingis is going to miss the entire year. And so when I look up and down this Knicks roster, I say, who exactly is going to score the basketball for this team? I mean, they have Tim Hardaway, right? They have Trey Burke and Courtney Lee, and yeah, it gets real ugly real quick after that, right? So who is going to take the lead for this Knicks team? I think Kevin Knox could be somebody who comes in and averages double-digit shot attempts right away. David Fizdale seems very high on him. They drafted him inside the top 10. I mean, there's a lot of things to like about that situation. Of course, efficiency is going to be concerned like it would be for any rookie. But in that spot, at 129 overall, it's hard to complain.
What do you think about the Knicks roster overall? To me, it feels like there's a lot of fantasy potential on that team, especially as you and I both feel Porzingis, if he plays, it's going to be really late this year. Guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. and Mario Hezonja and Enes Kanter, I like a lot of those guys this season.
Yeah, I mean, just because of the fact that they're all going to have to contribute if the Knicks are going to score points. I mean, legitimately, because they don't have that guy who's going to go out and be, hey, I can count on this guy for 25 every night. I think Tim Hardaway wants to be that player, and I think at times he can be that player, but consistency is king in the NBA, and he's just not quite there yet. So I like, whoever wins that point guard battle, I don't think it's going to be Emmanuel Mudiay, so I like Burke there. I think he's a natural scorer. Not somebody I'm necessarily targeting in drafts, but I think somebody who can contribute and should be on rosters. Tim Hardaway, we've talked about, easy one. Hezonja's just burned me too many times. I know he's got the one-year deal. I know he's going to get the chance. I know Fizdale likes the bigger, small forward, all fine and good. I'm willing to let somebody else pull their hair out over that experiment this time around. And if you look at the Knicks power forward depth chart, after Porzingis, it's Kevin Knox, it's Noah Vonleh, and it's Isaiah Hicks. And some people at home listening are going,
Who
the heck is Isaiah Hicks? Noah Vonleh is still in the league? Oh, my God. So who's going to play power forward for this team? And I think, they have Hazonia can play there. Lance Thomas can play there in a pinch. But the reality is I think Kevin Knox is destined for a lot of playing time. And when it comes to center, I do like Cantor if you're looking for points and rebounds, especially if you're in a league that rewards double-doubles. I think Cantor gets elevated a little bit. But there's been a lot of good talk about Mitchell Robinson, and I'm really curious about this guy.
Round 12, I'm just going to let you tell everybody about this one.
Well, in round 12, I made a grave mistake because as soon as I clicked Marquise Chris's name, I said, oh, no, not again. And, so Marquise Chris, now that he's in Texas with the Houston Rockets, new scene can change a lot of things, but it feels like he's already buried on the depth chart. It feels like he's already dragging with injuries. It just feels like it's not going to happen for Marquise Chris in the way that we all wanted to so bad. And those are the most frustrating fantasy players, right? The guys that we know have all the potential. And if they could only do this, if they could only do that, if they could only do this, and we talk ourselves into it. But the reality is we're chasing a unicorn. So let me make an analogy. When you're pursuing a significant other and you're in the dating world and you say, well, if this person only had that, and if that person only had this, you're building a person in your head that really doesn't exist. It's called chasing the unicorn. And so with Marquise Chris, I feel like over the last year or two, we've all sort of chased the unicorn. And in round 12, guess what I did? I chased the unicorn. Right? But when I look at some of the other names that came off the board, right, I really wanted Montrezl Harrell in the spot. He went one pick before me. I really wanted Montrezl Harrell because per minute last year, he was a big-time producer. And I know the Clippers got Marcin Gortat. I know they've got Boban, but I think there's a chance Harrell could start sooner rather than later at the 5. So I really would have liked that pick. I thought about Jaylen Brown in this spot, who went a few picks after me. I'm just worried about production. Kyrie Irving, Gordon Hayward, Jason Tatum, Al Horford, a lot of mouths to feed on that roster. So I'm just worried about the consistency of Jaylen Brown's production. If I had to do it again, I definitely would not have taken Marquise Chris. I probably would have taken Jaylen Brown, even with that concern. And I really probably would have looked a lot harder at Karis LeVert. Jonas took him in round 13 at 145 overall. He's a guy who has come on in a big way for me as a sleeper this year.
Yeah, your Jaylen Brown selection, that was another Welsh guy. You guys could end up building the same team in a lot of places. Round 13 and round 14. I'm just going to throw these two together because this is really the tail end of this thing. You had Domantas Sabonis in the 13th, and I'm going to mess up the pronunciation on this. Is it Elia Kobo?
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay, fair enough. Thoughts on the last couple rounds of this one? Your picks, anybody else's things that maybe you thought of after the fact? Just kind of end of draft thoughts.
Definitely. I like the fact that Mitchell Robinson came off the board here in round 13. I think he's definitely somebody who should be drafted in 10 or 12 team leagues, at deep 10 team, definitely in 12 teams. I think he's got that potential. I like the James Johnson pick in round 13. I know there's some health concern there, but he's a guy who is one of our fantasy favorites because he contributes in so many different categories. Avery Bradley's an interesting pick. It was such a weird season for him last year. He was barely on the court. We didn't really expect him to re-sign with the Clippers, and then he re-signed with the Clippers. So it was very, very confusing. But I figured for a guy who was really an aggressive target inside the top 50 or 60 a short time ago, to get that kind of discount, I think makes sense to roll the dice on him. I like Domantas Sabonis because, again, I look at that Pacers roster and I go, okay, there's Oladipo, there's Miles Turner. I know Thaddeus Young is back, but what else do we really have to work with from an offensive standpoint? Darren Collison is a facilitator. Corey Joseph will come off the bench. Aaron Holiday will have to earn his way, though I think he could earn his way sooner rather than later. And I think when Sabonis was on the floor last year, he showed us all this. He could really play. And I know Oladipo redefined the Paul George train on his own terms, but then Sabonis got on the floor and we said, oh, man, they got Sabonis too in that deal. That was pretty good. And so I think Sabonis is one of those guys who is not necessarily going to bring the defensive stats, but if he could get, 10 and 10, 12 and 10, 12 and 9, something like that, for a backup big man at 153, so you're talking outside the top 150, that's pretty good. I like that. And in the 14th round, I said, hey, this is the last round of the draft. Might as well take a shot with a Kobo. Just look at the Suns' point guard situation right now, right? We're a couple weeks away from the season starting, and it's a Kobo, it's the Anthony Melton, it's Shaq Harrison, and it's Isaiah Canaan. Who else is on the team that's going to play point guard? Maybe Devin Booker slides over and plays point guard a little bit more often, but I think they're asking a lot of him by doing that. You still got Troy Daniels hanging around, but they don't really have a lot in that backcourt that you say, oh, you know what? That would be a really good spot for a point guard. They chose not to re-sign Elfrid Payton after trading for him. So I think that's a wide open opportunity. And this is a guy who the Suns drafted maybe a little bit higher than some people thought that he would go. But this was a prospect who was actually being talked about as a first rounder, potentially, the back end of that first round. So I think Okobo for basically a shot in the dark, a dart throw, a guy who, if he doesn't pan out, you have no problem dropping because he was your last round pick. Why not? When you look at some of those other names, Colin Sexton, I think he's going to be horrifically inefficient in that Cleveland offense. Mo Harkless, we don't even know if he's going to be able to play. Trey Burke, points but nothing else. Rodney Hood, who knows if he's even good at this point. I do like the Josh Hart pick. Again, there's some Lakers bias there. I'm just worried about how much Josh Hart's going to really have an opportunity to contribute in terms of fantasy stats that will translate. George Hill, DeAnthony Melton, Pascal Siakam. There's nobody who's going in this round where I'm like, oh, man, I can't believe I forgot about that guy. So for me, Okobo is one of those guys like, yeah, I'll take a chance on him. And if I wind up being right, it's going to wind up being a nice little value pick in that last round.
Ethan Norof, the man who ushered me into the fantasy landscape. Thank you so much, as always. And can we do it sooner this time?
I'll be happy to, man. I'll be happy to appear anytime, any place, anywhere, as long as it involves you and a podcast.
He is my fellow Southern Californian. He is Ethan_Norof on Twitter. He's the man. Once more, thank you.
Thank you, buddy. Happy to do it.
A fantastic episode in the books. Thanks again to Dylan Jackson. MCWML, Michael Carter Williams missed layup. That's the coupon code if you want to get one from Mr. Jackson. If you'd like to get a coupon code from Mr. Ethan Norof, that one is just Norof, Norof. Norof. Punch it in. Either one of those codes. $3 off any product over at hoop-ball.com. So the season pass, the draft guide, the B150, whatever you got. Season pass, by the way, is a fantastic deal. It's $34.99. I know it sounds a little bit high. $31.99, obviously, with your $3 coupon code off. But it includes the draft guide, the B150 inside of that, and you get the full in-season premium membership. That's the entire year. You get all the premium stuff from Hoop Ball, including schedule breakdowns, including the live waiver shows with Aaron Brewski, the live weekly shows that Brew and I host on Mondays. You get the nightly discussions with pros. That's live on video chat. There's so much good stuff in the season pass, the in-season membership, I should say, that you might as well just get them together for $31.99. That'll take care of you for the whole year. You got your draft taken care of. You got your whole season taken care of. So again, those coupon codes are MCWML and Norof. Again, thank you to Ethan and Dylan for coming on the podcast. And this is a long one, so I'm just going to wrap it up. I'm Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today. Tomorrow, wrapping up the week, we'll talk to Aaron Brewski himself, the founder here at Hoop Ball. It's a really good episode. I know because it's already done. I'm just sitting on it, anxiously waiting to put it out tomorrow morning. Aaron and I talk about who is and who is not a sleeper anymore. Everybody loves the sleeper. This is the zigzag thing I've been talking about this year. Basically, we're going to go through all the names, the buzziest names in fantasy drafts, and Aaron's going to tell me if they're still sleepers, meaning they're still getting underdrafted, if they're snoozing, if they're waking up, or if the hype train has just plowed right into the side of the mountain. And we go through about 11 guys on tomorrow's show. So you're going to actually get some B150 nuggets mixed in. We're going to break all those guys down. It's going to be, I hope, a lot of help for you on draft day, deciding whether or not you should actually go for these guys, get involved in the bidding war, or just let it go. Just let it go. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.